The Kalmar Union is one of the most extraordinary political projects of medieval Europe, uniting Denmark, Norway, and Sweden under a single roof. The purpose of the Kalmar Union, founded in 1397 by Queen Margaret I of Denmark, was to break the expanding German hegemony, to oppose the commercial organization called the Hanseatic League, established again by the Germans, and to ensure that the Scandinavians also had a say in the reshaping of Europe. Now let us move on to the video and examine in more detail the Kalmar Union, which left its mark on an era as the ruler of Northern Europe. Denmark, one of the three members of the Union, became the state that strengthened its central authority the earliest. England, which was attacked by the Vikings in 870, came under the rule of Denmark through the Vikings. Thus, from the year 900 onward, they emerged as a prominent power in the region thanks to their dominance over England and the North Sea. With the unification of the Anglo-Saxons in 927, the Kingdom of England was established. Thus, while Denmark's rule over England came to an end, its political power also weakened. However, their consolidated strength in seafaring, their dominance in the Schleswig-Holstein region, and their ability to establish land contact with Europe always made them wealthier compared to Sweden and Norway. When we look at Norway, the Kingdom of Norway, founded in 872, was the state with the most difficult geography among the three kingdoms. Its mountainous terrain, extremely long coastline, and the large rural population made it difficult to establish a strong central authority. The epidemic that began in the country in the early 1300s wiped out nearly 50% of the population. As a result of this dramatic event, the kingdom's revenues collapsed and its military power completely dissolved. Subsequently, their economic dependence on Denmark increased. Under these conditions, it became almost impossible for Norway to survive independently. By the end of the 1300s, the kings of Norway were mostly of Danish origin. As a result of this, Norway became politically dependent on Denmark. This marked the beginning of the process leading to the Kalmar Union. Ultimately, in 1381, Norwegian lands were incorporated into Denmark and the two countries began to be ruled by a single king. As for Sweden, the unification among the Swedes and their emergence as a country took place in 970. Compared to Denmark and Norway, Sweden had a more decentralized structure, meaning a political system in which the powers of kings were limited. Especially in rural areas, aristocrats had powerful dynasties that controlled the kings. For this reason, although Sweden preserved its royal identity, it was in practice like a confederation. The country possessed many rich mineral deposits such as iron and copper. These mines, which sustained the economy, whetted the appetite of the Holy Roman Empire, and this continuously led to interventions in Swedish domestic politics. After years marked by internal turmoil, in 1364 the Swedish nobles took action to depose King Håkon VI. The nobles who asked Duke Albrecht of Mecklenburg for help wanted their country to be occupied by Albrecht. Albrecht accepted this offer and in 1364 invaded Sweden and became the new king of the country. However, it did not take long for the Swedish nobles to realize that they had made a mistake. During Albrecht's reign, the influence of the Holy Roman Empire over the country grew excessively strong, and the Swedish aristocracy realized that this time they had fallen under the yoke of the Hanseatic League. This situation led the Swedish nobles, who were decisive in the establishment of the Kalmar Union, to turn toward Denmark. The Kalmar Union was the product of an individual political genius rather than an idea or diplomatic necessity. This person was Queen Margaret of Denmark. After losing her husband and her son at an early age, Margaret became the de facto ruler of Denmark and Norway. In a short time, thanks to her governing ability and military intelligence, she became the most powerful actor in the region. Queen Margaret's purpose in wanting to establish the Kalmar Union was to break the influence of the Holy Roman Empire in the region, to create a united power under a single dynasty in Northern Europe, to control Baltic trade, to pacify the feudal nobles, and to fundamentally resolve regional instability. When Margaret put her plan into action in 1389, Norway was a country dependent on Denmark. All that remained was to incorporate Sweden into her territories. She presented this aim to the King of Sweden. However, King Albrecht rejected this. Albrecht was a prince of German origin. He had been brought to the Swedish throne to meet the anti-German expectations of the nobles. But over time, his exclusion of the Swedish aristocracy and his excessively high tax policies turned him into an unwanted ruler in Sweden. The Swedish nobles secretly contacted Queen Margaret and informed her that they would give her all kinds of support. Without wasting time, Margaret began preparations for war. An army of 1,500 men consisting of Danish heavy cavalry, Norwegian infantry, The rebel forces of Swedish nobles and mercenaries entered Sweden from Norwegian territory. In the battle fought on February 24, 1389, King Albrecht of Sweden was captured. Queen Margaret deposed King Albrecht from the Swedish throne and declared herself the new Queen of Sweden. Thus, no obstacle remained before the unification of the three countries. However, Margaret, who was quite advanced in age, was looking for a king whom all three kingdoms would accept and whom she could control. She chose her nephew Eric of Pomerania, who suited these characteristics. On June 17, 1397, the nobles of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden gathered at Kalmar Castle. At the meeting, while the establishment of the Kalmar Union was officially declared, King Eric was crowned as the ruler of the Union. While King Eric became the sole authority in foreign policy and defense, it was accepted that in domestic policy each country would preserve its separate administrations and separate assemblies. In short, a dynasty-based political partnership had been established. At first, everything was going well. The expansion of the Holy Roman Empire toward the north had been prevented and competition with the Hanseatic League had begun. However, especially from 1430 onward, the diverging interests among the three countries led to the shaking of the Union. The Swedish nobles were dissatisfied with the dominance of the Danish nobles. They were also extremely disturbed by the Kingdom of Denmark acting as the locomotive within the Union. King Eric's foreign policy, especially his conflicts with the Hanseatic League, led to an increase in taxes and a decline in iron exports. In 1434, a minor noble named Engelbrekt launched a rebellion against the rule of King Eric. As this rebellion, which began in the Borlänge region, soon received support from other nobles and peasants, it spread throughout all Swedish lands. As a result of the rebellion, which could not be brought under control, King Eric was deposed and Danish soldiers temporarily withdrew from Sweden. In 1439, Christopher I ascended to the throne of the Kalmar Union in place of Eric. King Christopher suppressed the rebellions in Sweden. He ended the disputes with the Hanseatic League and gave the noble class a sigh of relief. However, he died in 1448 when he was only 31 years old. He became the new king of the Kalmar Union. However, the Swedish nobles did not recognize Christian's kingship and chose Karl Knutsson as their own king. After 2 years of disagreements, a royal war broke out between Denmark and Sweden in 1450. The war was particularly devastating for Sweden. Due to the naval embargo imposed by Denmark, the Swedish nobles became unable to trade. This caused the country's economy to deteriorate gradually. Ultimately, in 1457, King Knutsson abdicated as a result of pressure from the Swedish nobles and Sweden rejoined the Union. Between 1457 and 1464, the Kalmar Union experienced a peaceful period. In 1464, Karl Knutsson, who invaded Sweden with an army of German mercenaries, declared himself King of Sweden for the second time. However, this reign lasted only 1 year. King Christian marched into Sweden, defeated Knutsson's armies, and recaptured Sweden. 2 years later, the same scenario occurred once again. In 1467, Knutsson, who captured Sweden with a larger army, this time remained on the throne for 3 years. Between 1467 and 1470, although the Kingdom of Sweden was de facto separate from the Kalmar Union, it was still officially a part of the Union. With the death of Knutsson in 1470 and King Christian in 1481, Hans became the new king of the Kalmar Union. However, as always, the Kingdom of Sweden opposed this situation and chose Elder Sten as their king. Since Sten declared his allegiance to King Hans in foreign policy, he was allowed to rule Sweden de facto. With his death in 1512, his third-generation cousin, young Sten, became the new king of Sweden. When young Sten ascended the throne, he believed that the Kalmar Union was unnecessary and that Sweden should be an independent kingdom. When King Hans became aware of this opinion of his, he began preparations for a campaign against Sweden. However, he did not live long enough and died in 1513. Christian, who succeeded him, completed the task he had left unfinished. Between 1513 and 1520, negotiations were held many times between Denmark and Sweden. However, young Sten never abandoned his passion for an independent Sweden. On January 19, 1520, King Christian entered Swedish territory with a large army consisting of French, German, and Scottish mercenaries. When they arrived near Bund, young Sten confronted them. In the battle that went down in history as the Battle of Bogesund, Christian emerged victorious, while young Sten survived the battle heavily wounded. However, he died 15 days later due to his wounds. Despite his death, Christian came to Stockholm seeking revenge on his supporters. After calling all the Swedish nobles to a meeting and organizing festivities, the guards who came to the palace arrested nearly 100 nobles and threw them into prison. On November 7th and 9, many of the imprisoned nobles were executed. In addition to them, 200 more people selected from the public were executed by the guards. After this event, which went down in history as the Stockholm Bloodbath, the Swedish people felt great anger toward King Christian. Gustav Vasa, the son of one of the executed nobles, began preparations for a rebellion against King Christian. The Swedish people, who now wanted to completely rid themselves of the Kalmar Union, gave great support to Vasa, and in 1521 the Swedish War of Liberation began. After the Swedish War of Liberation, which lasted about 2 years, Vasa captured all of Sweden and became the new king of Sweden. Subsequently, in 1523, the Kingdom of Sweden officially withdrew from the Kalmar Union. After the dissolution of the Union, Norway remained subject to Denmark for approximately 300 more years.